morning, gentlemen. Nice talking to you. I'm going to discuss India's foreign policy now. I'm afraid what's happening is that India is following the same policy which we call as the Nehruvian foreign policy, which was continuing from the time of Pandit Nehru. And we had thought there would be a change with Narendra Modi in power, but it has not happened that way. The latest example which you can see is that of Turkey. There was an earthquake there. India rushed in with aid, set up military hospitals, army doctors went in. The people were happy there, but the Turkish government didn't acknowledge it. And net result is, despite all that help which India gave, worth millions of dollars, the Turks, in a conference on human rights in the UN, castigated India and said India is violating all human rights in Kashmir. Now, this is the fruit of helping of Turkey. So I wonder who's the person who advised Mr. Modi to go and help Turkey. He could have sent some token help. There was no need for the Indian press and everybody going gaga over helping Turkey. And there were so many editorials and write-ups and videos that how happy the Turks are with India. They are so happy finally that they castigated India for human rights in Kashmir. And they've been doing that all the time. So the question, gentlemen, which is worth answering is, why does India go and do such things? Look at the organization of Islamic states. There are 55 countries, and routinely they condemn India for human rights violations in Kashmir. As far as Turkey is concerned, bear in mind they didn't ask India specifically for help, and yet India went and gave it, and then it's got a bloody nose. Now, as far as the Islamic world is concerned, other than 2 or 3 countries which are neutral as far as India is concerned, not a single Islamic country agrees that Kashmir is not a disputed territory and is part of India. Now, who's responsible for this? Why is our foreign policy failed, and why do we still keep on doing? There's a word, chamchagiri, that is something like supporting these countries and saying yes, 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 and all that, when these countries have no aim, nothing except to castigate India. And the Islamic world does not go and castigate China. That is the point to be noted. China is doing terrible things in the Xinjiang province. The Uyghur Muslims are asking for their rights. And what are they getting? 200,000 of them have been put in educational camps, imprisoned, and some of the women which have been left free have been married by the Han Chinese who have been settled there. And yet the Islamic world is totally silent on this atrocity. Though America has taken note of it, but then America also is beholden to China. It goes up to this point, thus far and no further. So we make some statement here and there, pass some resolution, that's about all. And the OIC has never condemned China for it. On top of it, 2 countries of the OIC, that is Turkey and Pakistan, have made a statement that we are satisfied with the way the Chinese are treating the Muslims, and yet they keep on castigating India for human rights. Now, there's a marked difference. Why should it happen? This is because China has built up its power, both military and economic, and is visible in the world. While where is India? Nowhere. And again, we have to get back to what Mr. Nehru did. He allowed China to rise up by himself getting into a cocoon because he had some outdated ideas and he was scared of a military coup in India and he kept the army defanged. And net result was India got a bloody nose in 62, which the entire world remembers even now. So, gentlemen, there's a dichotomy. That means there's a failure of Indian foreign policy. You keep on helping Turkey, they don't want to do anything for you. And then as far as China is concerned, we are not able to match them, and at the same time, our foreign policy is subservient to China. Now, that is a point which we must mention here. India does not want to antagonize China. We have a massive border dispute with China. So there are two options, which the Indians have. If you don't want to antagonize China, fair enough, then you set up a border settlement. You settle it as per the Chinese claims, which we could have done way back in 59. That was the time when Chow and Lai came to Delhi, and he brought a wonderful proposal, which I think is a wonderful proposal. What proposal he brought? He brought the proposal that we will recognize the McMahon line in the east, you recognize Aksai Chin. But till date, Aksai Chin is still being shown as a part of India, though Aksai Chin has never been part of India for 1,000 years, if I can recollect. And the only time it made part of India was when the British ruled India. They made those artificial borders, and the Chinese have now upped the ante. Then, when you didn't accept the offer in 59, then the offer again came in 83, when Mr. Deng was in power in China, and now the Chinese have upped the ante. They are claiming even Arunachal Pradesh, and we are unable to do anything about it other than just sit and talk here and there. I had thought that once Mr. Narendra Modi has become the Prime Minister of India, things will change. But the Nehruvian policies are still continuing, and that is the sad part of the whole thing. Nehru still rules the roost in India, and that is very sad. There is no fresh ground broken. India does not say a word about Xinjiang. India does not say anything about Tibet, which is being reeling under the boots of the Chinese army. And the Tibetan government in exile in India is shunned. Nobody bothers about it. The Dalai Lama is not free to go as and when he requires to Arunachal Pradesh because the Chinese object to it. And India listens to the Chinese. The Chinese do not issue visas on the Indian passport to residents of Arunachal Pradesh. They say it's a part of China. India is silent again on Tibet. That is what I'm saying. India is silent on Xinjiang. India is silent on Formosa. That is China, the second China. India is silent on Hong Kong. India doesn't say a word about human rights in China. And the worst part is that when the Galwan crash took place and 20 brave Indian soldiers were killed, just 4 days after that, Mr. Modi makes a statement in Parliament and says, gentlemen, China has not occupied any Indian territory. Now, why should you make it? That was to placate China. When at that time, the Chinese had almost taken some 2,000 square miles of Indian territory. So there is a policy. India has to counter China. India has to counter the Islamic world. And in both places, we are the laggards. I will say Modi has made some success as far as the Islamic world is concerned because we have reasonably good relations with UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. But these countries not backing India on Kashmir. None of them there to say that Kashmir is a part of India. They'll never say that. Even India's strategic ally, the United States now, doesn't want to say that. It doesn't say. It will support India on Arunachal Pradesh. It says Arunachal Pradesh is a part of India, but it does not say Kashmir is a part of India. It says it's a disputed territory. So who are the countries which are helping India? Who are the countries? There are only two in the world. The first is Israel and the second is Russia. Now I come to Russia, it's very important because when the 1971 war took place, Mrs. Gandhi was a shrewd leader, had signed a defense pact with Russia that stopped the Americans from making a big intervention in the Bay of Bengal. Though Nixon was very keen about it. But the Pakistan army surrendered so fast that Nixon was left thinking. Russia stabbed India in the United Nations by exercising its right of veto on the umpteen resolutions which were brought in by the Western world, the Americans and the British, for a plebiscite in Kashmir. Who can deny that? And God forbid if in those days those resolutions had been passed by the Security Council, there would have been an independent Kashmir, a Kashmir which would have become a UN protectorate. So India must thank Russia. And now there is a war in Ukraine, and this is a time when India needs to stand by Russia. But we are sitting on the fence. We don't want to antagonize the Americans. That is the crux of the whole issue. We don't want to antagonize the EU. So we are sitting on the fence. India is all the time neutral, and India is abstaining on all the votes against Russia. Only 7 to 8 countries have the guts to support Russia, and China is one of them. India is abstaining. Now, I'm very clear in one mind that you can't keep sitting on the fence or sitting on the wall like Humpty Dumpty. You have to be proactive. You've got to decide whether Russia is your friend or your ally, what it is. If it's only a friend, you don't expect much from Russia. Russia and China are allies, and India has got a tremendous border dispute with China. So, what is the future? It's only Russia which can pressurize China, or at least make it see reason, or at least to accept the line of actual control as a border at the moment. And if the Russians get a feeling, well, look, India is playing a double game, we will not put pressure on China and they'll let the situation drift. So, foreign policy, which has been enunciated by that great Indian thinker Chanakya, has to be followed. You've got to see which side the bread is buttered. As far as America is concerned, it has got a fond love for Pakistan. Let's not accept it. Let's accept it. Right from 1954, even during the Afghan war, when the Pakistan supported group, that is the Haqqani faction of the Taliban, was going and killing American soldiers, the Americans were still their friends. One rarely come across such a foolish country. It is only Donald Trump who recognized the perfidy of Pakistan, and he said so. But then he got voted out of power. The new man, Joe Biden, he is making all sorts of statements. Recently, the Pakistan Taliban made an attack in Karachi or someplace, and he said an attack on Pakistan, an attack on the United States by the Taliban. So, if you are that much in love with Pakistan, you don't expect the Americans to go whole hog for India. They want India only against China, that's all, as fodder. So, like in Ukraine, the battle took place, and the Americans sitting and watching. They are hoping India will fight with China. There will be a battle on between, and Americans will keep on supplying weapons to India, and they'll sit back and relax. So, the Indian foreign policy is subservient to China. Subservient to America, which is not the proper way to go about it. Similarly, the EU. EU is a past organization. I mean, they have got very little power in the world. Militarily, they are zero. They're dependent, riding piggy bank on the Americans. NATO, as even Donald Trump said, is a defunct organization, and India has to recognize it and build up its power. Now, there's no reason to go down to either China or the USA. There's no need for it. India is a power in its own right, though I will say that's power built on quicksand. Why do you say quicksand? Because you cannot be a global power if you are importing weapons. India is the largest importer of weapons in the world, and unfortunately, a good rifle is not made in India. And recently, now the Indians have signed a contract with Russia to manufacture the famous Kalashnikov rifles in India. I think they're going to manufacture them now, which is should have done 30 years back. So now we are in a very precarious position. The Indian foreign policy seems to be floundering. We have failed with Pakistan. which is one-fifth the size of India, and yet Pakistan is calling the shots not only in the Islamic world, it has the support of America, and it is fomenting terrorism in Kashmir. That is also a point to be seen. At the same time, India is losing control over the neighborhood. Bhutan is very wary of India, and now the Bhutanis are having second thought because they know India is not militarily capable of saving Bhutan. The Doklam incident is in mind. India made a big show of being Doklam, but once the army withdrew, Doklam is with the Chinese. They have built up their villages there, and they are holding the grounds. Now look at Nepal. Nepal was India's ally for time immemorial. Hindus, both sides of the border, open border, 2 to 3 million Nepalese working in India, earning their bread and butter. Yet Nepal now has a communist regime, and that is pro-China. They've been instigated by the Chinas to launch territorial claims against India, and what India did about it? Nothing. On top of it, the Indian Army chief made some silly statement that we have got roti and beti ka rishta with them. I mean, you can't make such silly statements when Nepal is not agreeing for these things. Then go down further to Bangladesh. It has recently acquired attack submarines from China. What do they need them for? That's cause for worry. Burma is, of course, like an inert gas. So they're not bothered about anything. At least they're not pro India. Now you come down to Lanka. Lanka has been so foolish. It's been friendly with Pakistan, of all countries, and it was great friends with China and took in billions of dollars. And what the result is that a very strategic port, the Bogota port, has been handed over to China for the next 99 years on lease. Pakistan, China has ringed India with these countries now. They have bases in Burma, they have bases in Lanka, they have bases in Pakistan, and they have a base in the Horn of Africa also. And it's very close to the American base. And now, China, being a global power, has intervened and made peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia. They were two sworn enemies. They have now established diplomatic relations after 7 years. It's all because of the efforts of the Chinese who have a say. Let's say if India had gone and asked for the same thing, would anybody have listened to India? Nobody would have listened to India. They have told India to go home. But both these countries, Saudi Arabia and Iran, have listened. They have set up diplomatic relations. The Americans are surprised. They were ones who were fueling the conflict between these two nations. And that's a diplomatic coup for China. It shows that China is now having global reach. Even today, I think President Xi is in Moscow and you can expect anything from him because he's on the side of Russia, but at the same time, I think he's having second thoughts about supporting the Russians continuously in the battle in Ukraine. Just as NATO is now having second thoughts about supporting Ukraine. The fighter planes which were to be given to Ukraine have not been given. Ukraine has got loss of shortage of ammunition. That's part of it. They're using them so fast that NATO cannot replenish them and they're going slow on it. And there's a possibility that Biden may well ask Zelensky to say hands up on Ukraine. So the point is the foreign policy is always something dynamic. We should have had the neighborhood in our hand, in our grasp, which we don't have. We should have dealt with China. We should have realized who is our friend. Why couldn't India be whole hog friends with Russia like China? And that would have been the icing on the cake. It's an alliance which would have stood this test of time. I think it has stood the test of time because the 80% of the Indian weaponry is from Russia. And the Russians have not let India down any time. They have even given us the S-400 missile system, while America has always let down India. Now, are you going to use the American drones? They're going to brought the American transport plane. Where is the guarantee that America will continue to support India in a war against Pakistan? That is a crucial point. Against China, they are very keen India should fight because Americans don't have the manpower, the divisions to fight China. They can do it only piggy bank on India, and so they're instigating India, they're offering India lollipop. They sent the F-35 recently in the air show at Bangalore. You can just imagine. It's a top American fighter, and probably they're ready to give it to India. But for what use? That aircraft given to India means nothing if you can't maintain it, if you don't get the spare parts for it. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Nothing. So, gentlemen, we are now reaching a situation in India where our foreign policy seems to be moribund, defunct. It looks like the Nehru's policy. When Nehru was always sitting on the fence, talking of neutrality, talking of I'm a great third world leader, and net result was it all became a big zero, and ultimately he couldn't show his face in the world. And we have political leaders, like Rahul Gandhi and others, who are just denigrating India. I don't see any other country's leader going abroad and denigrating his country, which Mr. Rahul Gandhi did when he had gone to London. He even appealed to America and England to restore democracy in India. I mean, you can just imagine. I mean, if a man can, to what depth a man can sink, he sank. But coming to Mr. Modi's foreign policy, the need for a revamp, a more mature approach. And now somebody can say that, well, the horses are bolted, so how are we going to put the time back? Yes. This is something which should have been done during the time of Nehru, and you can't, as the saying goes, Rome was not built in a day. So it's going to take time. But the intent should be there. There's a need for an aggressive foreign policy. India is the largest country population wise in the world, and there's no reason for India to be pessimistic, despondent, scared of either the Americans or the Chinese. The Indian people are resilient. They won freedom after 1,000 years of alien rule. And now it's important that this independence is safeguarded. Foreign policy also, as far as India is concerned, is a failure in Africa as far as Africa is concerned. I remember there were a few years back, there was some incidents in Delhi when the Aam Aadmi Party is in power, and some African women were caught for alleged activities. And one of the Aam Aadmi leaders said, "हम इस type के नहीं हैं." What do you mean by this nonsense? We are not of this type. There was racial discrimination in Delhi. And then at that time, the ambassadors from the African countries, the black countries, they told the ministry, the Indian ministry, that, well, please take stock of what is happening in India. Racialism is rampant, and that is a fact. India does not have much of a say in Africa at all. Zero. It is China which has the say. And why? Because China is the leading trading nation for 135 countries. That means 135 countries in the world have a trade with China, which is the maximum. No other country has it like that. Where is India's trade? India is even dependent on China. We have a trade of $130 billion with China, and the deficit is $100 billion. China is earning from India at the same time, needling India, not scared about India at all. Gentlemen, I have given you an idea of the Indian foreign policy. Jaishankar is a good man. I think he's a fine man, but he's cast in the Nehruvian mold because most of his time he was an IFS officer who served when the Nehru and Indira Gandhi were in power. And he continued during the regime of Narasimha Rao and others. And finally, he's been made the foreign minister because he was ambassador to China for a couple of years. That's very fine. But he can only articulate what he has been thinking for the last 30 or 40 years. India needs a robust foreign policy, a dynamic foreign policy. And at the same time, you need a little dictatorship at home. You cannot allow people like Mr. Rahul Gandhi to run amok. They should be brought to book. The IPC is there, and if there are charges which can be framed, they must be framed. It's not a bhai bandi, okay, we'll do something. It's not like that. Gentlemen, it's a very sad commentary at the moment which I have made. Indian foreign policy is really not what it should be. We have to have clear-cut options, and the famous book by Alistair MacLean, Fear is the Key, is not the way foreign policy is run. I close now, sir. I hope you like my video. Do share it with your friends. And Jai Hind, glory to India. At the same time, please subscribe to my channel, like it. I look forward to it. Thank you and goodbye.